The icy wind slammed against the thin windows of Pinewood Diner. At the exact moment, the porcelain plate slipped from Jack Morgan's hand and shattered across the cold tile floor, breaking with a sound that felt like someone's heart cracking open. It was a grey, rainy night, a nearly empty diner, and a 42-year-old man trying desperately to hold on to a life that had been slipping through his fingers. Jack crouched to pick up each broken piece, his hands shaking not just from the cold, but from the familiar weight of disappointment, the same feeling that had stayed with him for the 5 years since Laura passed away. The whole diner was soaked in tired yellow light, the smell of old coffee drifting through the air along with the faint clink of spoons hitting cups from behind the counter. By the window, a sophisticated woman appeared like a misplaced figure from another world. She sat upright, untouched slice of apple pie before her, her deep, calm eyes observing everything without bothering to hide the cold calculation behind them. Jack had no idea who she was, but the feeling of being examined so thoroughly forced him to take a slow breath before walking toward her table. He tried to keep his voice gentle, even as his heart stumbled in his chest. "Would you like more coffee, Mum?" She looked up, her steel-colored eyes meeting his for just 1 second, enough to make Jack feel like he was standing in front of someone who had seen the world too long to overlook even the smallest detail. "No," she answered with a single word, then turned her gaze back to the dark road outside. Jack stepped back, but unease clung to him like the cold scent of rain seeping into his clothes. For some reason, she was unlike any wealthy customer he had ever served. They were usually busy, rushed, too absorbed in their own lives to look a waiter in the eye. But this woman she watched, she listened, and she was waiting for something. And he had no idea whether he was about to lose something big or receive something even bigger. A raspy laugh erupted from the bar. Tom, the 58-year-old cook, was telling the same winter in Minnesota story he had told 100 times about surviving with nothing but an old oil stove and a few cans of beans. Jack still smiled, still nodded at the familiar points, but his mind drifted toward the small apartment where Ellie, his 7-year-old daughter with golden hair and a smile strong enough to pause every tragedy in the world, was sleeping alone. He could still hear her voice every night saying, "Daddy, can you come home early?" And his answer never changed. "When Daddy makes more money, Ellie." He had been making that promise for 5 years. Yet everything only grew worse. The night shifts stretched on endlessly, and the thin paychecks meant that just one higher bill could send the whole apartment into chaos. But Jack kept serving every cup of coffee with a sincere kindness, the one quality he still held on to from his former life. 9:15, the mysterious woman set down her cup, not taking another sip. She stood up, graceful and quiet, exactly as she had appeared. She signed the bill, placing the pen down with such precision that Jack felt every movement had been calculated. Then she walked out of the diner, leaving behind a trace of expensive perfume hanging in the cold air. Jack looked down at the bill and sighed. The tip a painfully familiar number. The people with the most often left the least. He folded the paper with a heavy disappointment and walked toward the table to clean up. That was when he saw the white envelope. It lay tilted under the remaining plate, the edge slightly damp from the steam of her coffee cup. On the front, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "For the waiter who remembers names." Jack frowned. He picked up the envelope, its weight almost nothing, but somehow making his hand grow heavier with the sense that this was not something small. He opened it. Inside was a folded note and a business card. The yellow light flickered across the words, and Jack's heart tightened. "I need to see you. This is not charity. This is an offer. Come to Harrington Industries at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Ask for Margaret Harrington. Do not ignore this." Jack froze. That name, Margaret Harrington, appeared on television, in business magazines, in interviews about companies reshaping America. The woman who had just drunk coffee in this tiny, run-down diner was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. A heavy wave of rain slammed against the window, shaking the glass, as if urging him to make a decision right now. But Jack just stood there, gripping the letter heart, pounding wildly. Why would a billionaire come to a shabby diner in a small town? Why watch him for an entire hour? Why leave a message asking for a private meeting? And more importantly, why say this is not charity? Through the sound of pouring rain, Jack felt his life, a life that had seemed locked inside this struggling diner, forever standing on the edge of something enormous, strange, and almost impossible to believe. An opportunity, a trap, a test he didn't know. But that night, as the rain hammered the metal roof, as the diner slowly emptied, as Tom wished him good night, and slipped out the back door, Jack remained standing beside table 4, staring at the note, as if it might explain itself. One thin envelope, one short message, one powerful name. And just like that, his entire world began to shake. Somewhere within the sound of the rain, Jack could hear Ellie's voice, calling him in his memory. He tightened his grip on the letter. He had never believed in the strange turns of fate. But tonight, fate had knocked on his door, and tomorrow would answer everything. Jack barely slept through the night. The sound of rain hammering the thin metal roof of his tiny apartment blended with the unease that kept him twisting on the worn-out bed every turn, producing a creak from the old wooden frame. The alarm clock read 3:17 in the morning, yet his eyes remained wide open, fixed on the stained ceiling. The note Margaret had left sat on the small dining table by the window, its white paper so bright it seemed to glow in the dark. He stared at it, as if simply looking long enough would make all the questions disappear. But nothing disappeared except the little piece he had left in his life. When dawn arrived, Ellie stepped out of her room, her hair a messy tangle, her eyes squinting sleepily. She climbed onto his lap like she did every morning. "Daddy, you did not sleep." Her voice was as soft as a kitten. Jack held her small shoulders gently, refusing to let any of his worry spill over to her. "Daddy is just a little tired," he lied. But Ellie always saw deeper than his words. She touched his cheek. "Are you working the night shift today?" Jack hesitated. He remembered the invitation. He remembered the name, Harrington. He remembered the look in the woman's eyes last night, a look that could see past a cheap waiter's uniform and touch the part of him even he sometimes forgot. "No, Daddy has something to do today," he said. Ellie smiled sleepily. "You will do great." Just a few simple words, and Jack felt his eyes sting. By 8 o'clock, he had put on the only suit he owned that was still intact, the same suit he had worn at his own wedding more than 10 years ago, back when Laura still laughed, under warm yellow lights, making the world feel gentler. The jacket was tighter now, the seams pulling slightly at the shoulders, but it made him feel serious, as if he were stepping into an interview where the reward was not just a job, but the future of his daughter. On the road to Pittsburgh, his heart pounded like urgent knocking. Harrington Industries rose through the morning mist, 35 floors of blue glass, reflecting the faint sunlight. It was so tall Jack had to lift his head a little more just to see the top. He swallowed hard. No one from Pinewood Diner walked into places like this. At least no one he had ever known. The automatic revolving doors opened, releasing a rush of fresh flowers and cold air conditioning into his face. The marble floors were polished so bright he could see the reflection of his old shoes. Behind the front desk, a young woman with a professional smile looked at him, the way someone might look at a lost traveler who had stepped into the wrong world. "I have an appointment with Miss Margaret Harrington," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady, but it still sounded like a whisper. The receptionist blinked quickly, her smile freezing for half a second before she masked it with trained politeness. "May I have your name?" "Jack Morgan." She picked up the phone and murmured a few words. When she looked up again, her expression had changed. There was surprise and perhaps even caution. "Mr. Morgan, please take the elevator to the left. Floor 27. Floor 27. A number that once meant the level where people with money power or impossibly lucky lives belonged. And now it was waiting for him. The elevator opened to a strangely quiet space. Jack caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective metal wall. He did not recognize the man staring back, a face pale from nerves, hair slightly messy, tie crooked despite him adjusting it 3 times. He took a deep breath. When the door slid open on floor 27, the world before him was a blend of dark wood and gleaming glass, natural light flooding in from massive windows like a waterfall. A young assistant, maybe around 30, approached. "Mr. Morgan, please, follow me." He walked so fast, Jack had to lengthen his stride to keep up. They passed rows of offices with modern desks and perfectly dressed people, typing at speeds that suggested they were not allowed to make mistakes. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Jack only knew he was trying not to feel out of place. At the end of the hallway, the assistant stopped in front of a large walnut door. He knocked twice. The door opened so softly, Jack was not sure if he heard anything at all. And Margaret Harrington was standing there. She did not look like the customer from last night. No distance, no disguise, no quiet observation. She stood in full authority, the authority of someone who oversaw thousands of employees, from the way she held herself to the way the window light reflected off her perfect ash-grey suit. "Jack Morgan," she said slowly, as if weighing the name. "Thank you for coming." Jack straightened, searching for his voice somewhere in his throat. "I do not know why I am here." Margaret walked toward the long table, resting her hand lightly on the edge, as if anchoring the beginning of something important. "Last night I watched you. The way you spoke to customers, the way you treated the older cook, the way you looked at your phone when your daughter called. Not everyone keeps their kindness in difficult circumstances." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "I am not looking for someone skilled. I am looking for someone good." Jack's heart clenched. A simple sentence, yet it struck the deepest part of him, the part that kept going, for Ellie, held steady, for Ellie, lived for Ellie. "And you, Jack Morgan," she continued, her voice sharp, yet sincere, "are someone I want to give an opportunity." Jack forgot to breathe for a moment. Margaret rotated the folder on the table and slid it toward him. An offer, a job, a position that could change your life. Then she looked at him with an expression that made every boardroom and every floor below vanish. "The only question is, are you willing to step out of your old life to see who you could truly become?" And in that moment, Jack understood. This was not an invitation. This was a crossroads. This was a chance meant for exactly one kind of person, someone desperate enough to try, kind enough to deserve it, and brave enough to change everything. He just didn't know whether he had that bravery yet. Jack stood there with his hand still resting on the edge of the folder Margaret had slid toward him, but he did not open it. Part of him feared whatever lay inside was too big to believe, and part of him was unsure whether a diner waiter even had the right to touch pages stamped with the Harrington Industries logo. Margaret saw the hesitation. "You may sit," she said, not as a command, but as an invitation placed gently within the refined space of her office. Jack pulled out the chair, but he sat crookedly awkward, as if his body had not yet learned how to fit into an expensive chair sculpted with meticulous curves. "Last night I didn't go to Pinewood Diner to eat," Margaret continued. "I went to observe." Jack felt his stomach tighten. He disliked the feeling of being watched, and he hated even more the thought that his small, struggling life had been examined under the gaze of someone whose world was nothing like his. But Margaret did not let him drown in that defensive discomfort. "Jack, do you know what you are best at?" she asked. "No," he answered honestly. "I just try to do my job." "Exactly." She tilted her head. "You do it without expecting anything in return. You care about people naturally, not for benefit, not for recognition. I have been looking for someone like that for a very long time." Jack opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. His hands began to warm, not from anxiety, but from a fear he rarely allowed himself to name, the fear of hope. Hope was a luxury for people who lived on thin paychecks and unfinished promises. "The position I am offering is to manage a major community support program," Margaret said. "I need someone who can see what others cannot. Someone whose heart is strong enough to bear the weight of other people's struggles, and strong enough not to collapse when pressure comes." She placed her hand on the folder. "You are the right fit." Jack let out a short laugh, but it broke halfway and turned into a choke of disbelief. "I do not have a degree," he said. "I am just a waiter. I used to work in IT, but I left that behind long ago. I am out of practice. I am not special." Margaret narrowed her eyes, as if he had just said the most nonsensical thing in the entire boardroom. "Do you think any of that is what I am looking for?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp, like a pulled string. "I have an entire building full of competent people. What they lack is exactly what you have." Jack shook his head. His heart beat so loud he could hear the rush of blood in his ears. "Why me?" Margaret studied him for a long moment, a gaze that felt as if she were looking through every layer of time, through every fracture in his life, down to the foundation. "Because you know what loss is," she said. "And someone who knows loss understands the value of opportunity. I do not trust those who have never fallen. I trust those who stand back up." Jack felt his chest tighten when she spoke of loss. Laura, her hair brushing against his face, every morning her laughter lighting up their entire home. And Ellie barely 2 years old when her mother left the world, leaving Jack with a grief too heavy to give a proper name. He looked down at his hands, the small calluses from carrying trays, the faint cracks from washing dishes in water that was always too hot, and he suddenly realized he had aged far more than his 42 years. "I need time," Jack said after a long pause. "This is too much." "Of course," Margaret replied. "You have 3 days." "But Jack..." She stopped, making sure he would not miss the most important part. Opportunity does not knock many times, and it does not come to those who wait. It comes to those who step forward. That line followed Jack all the way out of Harrington Industries. It followed him as he stepped onto the busy street, as he stood on a crowded sidewalk, feeling completely alone, and throughout the entire bus ride back to his small town. The glass tower lingered in his mind, like the silhouette of a future that had reached out to touch him, then pulled back to see whether he would dare follow. When he pushed open the door of Pinewood Diner that evening, the smell of grease, the sound of the dishwasher, and Tom's booming laugh pulled him back to the familiar world he knew. Megan, the young waitress, spotted him and frowned. "You look like you just saw a ghost," she said. Jack forced a weak smile. Maybe something close to that. Tom set his spatula down and tilted his head, studying Jack. "Son, what happened?" Jack told them. But as the words left his mouth, he realized how strange the story sounded, so strange that even he was not sure he believed it. Tom stared at him, his old eyes heavy with the weight of someone who had seen dreams break more often than they came true. "You know what rich folks want?" Tom asked. "No," Jack replied. "What you do not have." The sentence fell into the diner like hot oil hitting a pan. Megan shook her head. "Maybe she really is good," she said quickly. "Maybe she saw something in you that you cannot see." Tom grunted. "People like Harrington do not see anything. They choose. They own. They buy." Jack stayed silent because part of him feared Tom was right. But another part, small but stubborn, remembered the look in Margaret's eyes when she spoke of loss. That look could not be faked. Jack left the diner at midnight when the town had grown still. When he got home, Ellie was asleep, clutching the stuffed bear Laura had given her before she died. Jack stood at her doorway for a long time. He knew the next 3 days were not just about choosing a job. They were about choosing whether he dared leave behind his safe, stagnant life for something that could change everything for both of them. As he switched off the living room light and stepped into the dark, Margaret's words echoed again like a distant bell rolling across a valley. "I do not trust those who have never fallen. I trust those who stand back up." Jack closed his eyes. 3 days. 3 days to decide Ellie's future. 3 days to decide whether a diner waiter could truly step into the world of someone who commands an empire. But he did not yet know that the next 3 days would test more than his resolve. They would test his heart in ways he never imagined. The next morning, Jack sat in front of the old laptop he had used for more than 8 years, its screen marked by a thin, vertical streak of blue light like a scar. Ellie was eating cereal beside him, her legs swinging with the carefree rhythm only children seem to possess. Jack typed the words, "Margaret Harrington," background into the search bar, his heart pounding as if he were stepping into territory ordinary people were never meant to touch. Hundreds of results appeared. Photos of Margaret at press conferences, at global summits, at elegant charity events. A sharp, unwavering CEO, her eyes carrying the kind of focus that always seemed several steps ahead of the world. But when Jack scrolled deeper and found an old article from more than 10 years earlier, he stopped. The headline read, "Margaret Harrington, from a diner waitress's daughter to an industry-leading CEO." Jack opened it. His heart sank slowly as he read. Margaret's mother, Helen Harrington, had been a waitress in a small diner in northern Pennsylvania. She worked 2, sometimes 3 shifts a day for years without rest. Margaret's father died young, leaving mother and daughter living off a meager paycheck. Jack swallowed hard. The words blurred slightly as he realized this was almost his and Ellie's story, just 62 years earlier. Helen had once suffered a serious accident that required an expensive surgery, and a man from their neighborhood, a poor construction worker, had rallied others to donate and help her survive the hardest period of her life. When she recovered, Helen tried to find him everywhere to repay the kindness, but he had moved away, leaving her with a debt of gratitude she could never repay. When Jack finished reading, he pressed his hand to his forehead. His throat tightened. That pain, that effort, that feeling of owing something to the stray kindness of a stranger who crossed your life at the right moment. He understood it all. Last night when Margaret said, "I am not looking for someone skilled. I am looking for someone good." Jack had assumed it was just a polished line for effect. But now everything made far more sense. She did not choose him randomly. She wore in him the image of the man who once saved her mother, the man she never found again. And perhaps she believed that repayment did not lie in the past, but in giving opportunity to those who carried the same quiet goodness in the present. That afternoon, Jack walked to Pinewood Diner, with his mind crowded full of thoughts. The air was still cold, but sunlight pierced through the row of pine trees in front of the diner, casting long beams of light like pathways he did not dare enter. Tom was wiping the stove, and Megan was organizing the register. "You look better than yesterday," Tom said without looking up. "Not sure about that," Jack replied. "I found something I never thought I would." Megan paused, watching him as if he were about to say something heavy. "You all right? I read about her," Jack said. About her mother. About how they lived. He told them about the article, every detail of Helen's life, the kind man who helped her, and how Margaret had grown up from the harsh valley of working-class struggle. When he reached the part where Helen worked 3 shifts a day, Megan's eyes softened. When he described Helen's accident, Tom slammed the cloth down. "Sounds like someone I know," Tom muttered. "You think that is why she picked you?" Jack exhaled. "I do not know, but everything is starting to make sense." Tom crossed his arms. "You really think people give something for nothing, especially a CEO? That big Jack thought of Ellie, of the bright way her eyes lifted every time she said, 'Daddy, you can do it.' He thought of Laura, who had always believed he was stronger than he believed himself to be. He thought of the cold nights, the unpaid bills, the efforts that were never quite enough. Then he thought of Margaret's words. 'I trust those who have fallen and stood up again.' Not something for nothing," Jack said quietly. She called it an offer, not charity. Tom was silent. Megan was silent. The whole diner felt suspended between doubt and hope. Once the shift began, Jack could not focus. Every cup of coffee he poured made him wonder if this might be the last cup he would ever serve. Every plate he carried made him question whether he was ready to step out of the painful but familiar life he knew. Close to 9 o'clock that night, Jack's phone buzzed. Email from Ellie's school. He opened it. Subject line: "Notice tuition for next year." His heart stalled. The amount had doubled. He had no idea how he would manage enough to keep Ellie in her current school, the only place where she still felt life could be beautiful. Jack leaned against the wall, eyes shut tight, gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether he dared step into the world of someone like Margaret. But one email made the choice brutally clear. If he didn't change his life, Ellie's life would be pulled down with his, not because of her fault, but because of his limits. After his shift, Jack stepped into the cold night. The yellow streetlights cast shadows across his shoes, producing 2 silhouettes walking beside each other. One was the man he was now exhausted, worn down, always struggling. The other was the man he could become, a father, strong enough to pull Ellie out of the cycle of poverty. When he opened the apartment door, Ellie ran to him and wrapped herself around his leg as she did every night. "Daddy's home," she squealed. Jack knelt and held her tightly, and in that moment, inside the small, dim room, he knew Margaret had not just offered him a job. She had offered him the chance to answer the biggest question of his life, what kind of man he wanted to be for his daughter. That night, as Jack sat alone with the invitation in front of him, his eyes no longer held confusion, only the quiet fear of someone about to cross a line that could change everything. But beneath that fear was a tiny flame so small only he could see it, yet bright enough that he could not ignore it. And that flame whispered one clear message. "Tomorrow, go find your answer." On the morning of the second day, Jack woke with a resolve he thought he had finally settled on to refuse the offer. Not because he did not want change, but because he was terrified of it. Terrified of stepping into a world where he did not belong. Terrified of losing the fragile stability he had left, just to chase something too big, too distant, too easy to shatter. He thought of Ellie, of her smile, of the cheap cereal breakfasts, filled with laughter, of their tiny apartment that had never known luxury, yet held everything that remained of their family. And he thought he could not gamble all of that for an invitation that had arrived too suddenly. But fate never let him escape so easily. When Jack arrived at Pinewood Diner early in the afternoon, Megan rushed toward him with a mixture of panic and excitement. "Jack, have you seen it? Oh my God, everyone is talking about you." Jack frowned, talking about what she pushed her phone into his hands. A headline from a local news site blazed across the screen, dramatic and intrusive. "Billion-dollar CEO dines at roadside diner, unexpectedly invites waiter into her company. Generosity or publicity stunt." Below it was a secretly taken photo from the previous night, Jack pouring coffee for Margaret, his eyes lowered while she watched him intently. Beneath the article, the comments were relentless. "Obviously a publicity trick. He does not look special at all. Probably another wealthy savior story. Maybe they knew each other before. Nothing is free." Jack felt his stomach twist, as if someone had reached inside and yanked it tight. These people knew nothing about him, nothing about how he lived, nothing about what he had lost. They looked at a single picture and decided the entire story. He handed the phone back to Megan, his hands trembling. "It is going to be fine," she tried to reassure him. "The article will fade." But Jack knew it would not. In a small town where gossip spread faster than the smell of fresh pie, the story had already exploded. When Tom walked out from the kitchen, he slid a folded newspaper across the counter as if presenting evidence. "You made the news," he said, half serious, half bitter. "I told you, Jack. Rich people never do anything without a reason." Jack tried to keep calm, but a deeper fear was clawing at him, far worse than being the subject of gossip. What if the story reached Ellie's school? Would she be teased? Asked questions she did not understand, questions sharp enough to bruise a child's heart. A phone rang inside his pocket. Jack pulled it out, and his chest dropped when he saw the caller, Miss Davis, Ellie's homeroom teacher. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice heavy. "Ellie has been crying for the past hour. Some parents saw the article, and the kid said some unkind things. Is Ellie all right?" Jack's voice cracked. "I took her outside to calm down, but she is very upset. She asked me, did my dad do something wrong?" Jack felt the world collapse into his chest. Ellie, the child who never once asked for more than he could give now, worrying that her father had done something bad because of a cheap article. "I will come get her now," he said. On the drive to the school, he gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. Each passing yard was another stab of guilt. He had done nothing wrong, yet Ellie was paying the price. When she ran into his arms, eyes swollen from tears, Jack dropped to his knees and held her close. "They said bad things about you," Ellie sobbed. "They said you did something to get money from a rich lady. But you did not right." Jack's heart clenched so tightly he could barely breathe. "No, Ellie. Daddy did nothing wrong." "Then why do they say that?" she asked, confused eyes wide and trembling. "Because sometimes," Jack whispered, "people talk about things they do not understand." Ellie nodded, but her small shoulders still shook. Jack knew he had to protect her, even if he couldn't protect himself. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, Jack stood alone in the dim living room, looking again at the invitation from Margaret. Between the public backlash, Ellie's tears, and the doubts from everyone around him, the offer no longer looked like an opportunity. It looked like a spark, something that could warm his life or burn everything down. In that volatile moment, Jack dialed Margaret's number. She answered almost immediately. "Jack," she said, steady and calm, as if she had expected the call. "Something happened at school," Jack said, struggling to keep his voice from shaking like water in a storm. "My daughter cried because of rumors. I cannot let this affect her. Jack, let me handle. I cannot work for you." He cut in every word, slicing through him. "I cannot let Ellie get hurt, because our lives suddenly became noticeable. I am sorry." He hung up before she could respond. And the second the dial tone rang out, Jack felt the hollow ache spread through his chest. He leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. No Margaret. No offer. No change. Only him and Ellie, just like the past 5 years. He told himself he had done the right thing. But the pain, rising like a tidal wave, told another story. He had just turned away from the only door that had ever opened for him, and he had no idea if that door would ever open again. Yet fate never allowed stories like this to end halfway. And that night, as Jack drifted into a heavy, burdened sleep, he had no way of knowing that his decision would push Margaret to show up at his doorstep the next morning, carrying a truth that would overturn everything he thought he understood. At 7 o'clock that morning, a knock sounded at the door. Urgent, but not loud, firm, but not intrusive, as though the person outside was certain Jack was awake, even though he had slept less than an hour after a long night of turmoil. He jumped up, heart tightening, at the thought of Ellie being startled awake, then stepped out of his bedroom into the pale, misty light of dawn. When he opened the door, he froze for half a second. Standing in front of the worn apartment was Margaret Harrington, not in a flawless suit, and not stepping out of a luxury car, but wearing a thick camel-colored coat and warm boots. Her hair tied back neatly, her face stern, yet carrying something tired. A real kind of tired, not the tiredness of a wealthy person drowning in contracts, but the tiredness of someone who had spent the entire night worrying about something that was never her responsibility. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. Her voice was not raised but strong enough to cut through the still hallway air. Jack instinctively blocked the doorway, as if shielding the last scraps of privacy in his life. "I told you already," he said. "I cannot work for you. I will not let Ellie be dragged into more trouble." "I know," Margaret replied, and in those 2 words was a resonance that made Jack stop speaking. It was not persuasion, not pleading, but understanding. "May I?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, in a quiet request to enter. Her eyes did not avoid his, did not push or demand. Jack exhaled heavily and stepped aside. She walked into the small apartment, glancing around, not with pity, but with the recognition of someone who had once lived in a place built from the same hardships. Ellie sat at the table, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes wide at the unexpected visitor. Margaret paused, as if something soft and fragile inside her had been touched. She lowered herself, slowly kneeling, so she was at Ellie's eye level, her movements gentle and careful not to cross any boundary a child might have. "You must be Ellie," she said, her voice so soft, Jack barely recognized it as belonging to the woman who ran a billion-dollar industrial empire. Ellie nodded, gripping her bear tighter. "I brought something for you." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a hardcover science book, the exact one Ellie had admired at the store days earlier, but had not asked Jack to buy. Ellie's eyes lit up like someone had cracked open a pocket of warm sunlight inside her. "How did you know I like science?" the girl whispered. "Because your father told me," Margaret answered with equal gentleness. Ellie looked at Jack, waiting for permission. He nodded slowly, and she accepted the book with both hands, as though receiving a treasure. "Thank you," she whispered. Margaret rose and turned back to Jack, her smile fading into a rare expression of worry. "I did not come here to pressure you into changing your decision," she said. "I came because of Ellie." Jack frowned. "What happened at school was not your fault," Margaret continued, her tone low but precise, like a needle finding exactly where the pain was. "It was the fault of adults, people who do not understand your circumstances, but think they have the right to judge." Jack wanted to argue, to say. Her words changed nothing, but Margaret stepped slightly closer, while maintaining a respectful distance. "I called the school last night," she said. "They will speak with every parent involved. Ellie will not be hurt by those meaningless rumors again." Jack's heart thudded hard. "You did not have to." "I did." Margaret cut in firmly. "Because Ellie should not carry the consequences of decisions made by adults. I know that feeling. I was once the child forced to bear that weight without understanding why. I refuse to let it happen again." She drew a steady breath, then said something Jack never expected. "I did not come to convince you. I came to apologize." The word stunned him. A powerful CEO, a woman the media called the Steel Executive, stood in his cramped living room, apologizing. "I underestimated how far the rumors would spread," Margaret said. "I misjudged how much your privacy would be affected. I allowed my business to touch your home life more than I had intended. I am sorry for that." Jack felt goosebumps ripple across his skin. He had never heard an apology so sincere from someone who held so much power over others. It shifted the way he saw her, not as a CEO, but as a woman trying to repair something she had unintentionally damaged. But Margaret continued softly. "I still want you to know the real reason I chose you." The dim morning light shone across her features, highlighting the fine lines around her eyes, marks that belonged not to power, but to memory. "My mother," she began, "was a waitress like you. She worked endlessly to raise me. And there were moments she believed she was not good enough, not strong enough, not educated enough to deserve anything better." Her voice trembled slightly on the word mother. "But she had one thing I never forgot: kindness. She remembered everyone's name. She helped people without expecting anything. And when she had her accident, the first person who helped her was a man poorer than she was." Margaret looked straight at Jack. "You remind me of him. The way you bent down to help that child who could not pay for dinner. the way you talked to the old taxi driver, the way your voice softened when Ellie called, even though you were exhausted. I did not choose you because you are poor. I chose you because you are good." Jack felt his throat burn, a swell of emotion rising like a tide he could not fight back. He had always believed kindness merely helped him survive each day, never imagined it could make someone like Margaret take notice. "But I am not sure I am right for this," he said, breathing unevenly. "I am scared." "Good," Margaret responded instantly, as if she had been waiting for that sentence. "People who are never afraid are the ones who are dangerous." Then she stepped back, giving him space to breathe again. "You have 2 more days. If you refuse, I will respect it. If you accept, I will walk with you through every step." As she headed toward the door, Ellie ran forward, clutching her book. "Miss Margaret," she called. Margaret turned, bending slightly. "Yes, Ellie." "My dad works really hard," Ellie said, her clear blue eyes touching the deepest place in anyone's humanity. "But he is very good. I think he can help a lot of people." Margaret smiled a real smile, not the smile of a CEO or a public figure, but the smile of someone who just discovered a piece of hope. She nodded gently to the little girl. "I think so too." When the door closed, Jack stood still in the room, his chest tight with a storm of emotions, shame, gratitude, fear, hope, all blending into something unfamiliar and powerful. He looked over at Ellie, who was turning the pages of her new book with a fascination he rarely saw, and in that moment, for the first time since Laura passed away, Jack felt his feet wanting to move forward, rather than simply hold the line against life. He did not know what he would choose, but he knew one thing. Whatever decision he made, it would no longer be shaped by his fear, but by Ellie's future. That night, when the city had settled into silence, and only the occasional hum of distant cars drifted through the air, Jack sat alone in the small living room, the desk lamp casting a tired yellow light across the packet Margaret had given him. He had opened it many times, yet he still could not bring himself to read it all the way through. Not because he did not understand it, but because he feared that once he reached the final page, he would no longer have any reason left to run. Ellie's eyes grew heavy as she leaned against his leg. Her science book opened to a page filled with illustrations of planets and animals, images that looked like gateways into worlds Jack had never been able to open for her. Daddy, Ellie whispered, without lifting her head, "Are you sad because I cried at school yesterday?" Jack flinched. She always managed to ask the hardest questions with a voice so pure that it softened the pain instead of deepening it. "No, Ellie," he said, gently touching her soft hair. "Daddy is sad because people hurt you, not because you cried." Ellie was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If you take the new job, will you come home earlier with me?" Jack's heart slowed for half a beat. A simple question, yet carrying the entire world of a child used to falling asleep alone, night after night. He swallowed the tightness in his throat. Maybe he said softly, "Daddy will try his best." Ellie held his hand. "I think you will do great. Miss Margaret thinks so too. I saw it in her eyes." Jack tilted his head. "What did you see?" Ellie smiled faintly, like Mummy's eyes when she looked at you. A gentle cut, soft but deep. For the first time in many months, Ellie spoke of Laura without trembling. She was growing, getting stronger. And maybe it was time he did too. When Ellie finally fell asleep, Jack opened the packet again. This time he did not close it. He read about the community support program, the job training initiatives, the centers helping single parents the tuition grants for children from difficult backgrounds. Every page carried a story. Every story carried a person. And every person was another version of Jack. If he took this job, he would not only change his own life, but the lives of hundreds of others. But if he failed, he could pull many people down with him. The pressure felt like the entire Harrington building was resting on his chest. He stood, stepped quietly onto the small balcony, and looked down at the empty street. The cold air slapped his face awake. He remembered Margaret's words. "I do not trust those who have never fallen. I trust those who stand back up." He had fallen. Many times. Losing his wife, losing his career, losing his belief in the future. Yet every morning he still stood up for Ellie. Was that enough to make him the right person for this role he did not know? But he knew something else, something clearer than fear. If he refused out of fear, Ellie would learn to fear the world just like him. But if he accepted, she would learn to face it. And that was the greatest gift he could give her. The third day arrived with a strange quiet, as if time itself was waiting for something to break open. Jack took Ellie to school, held her tight, and whispered, "I love you. I promise I will do the right thing." Ellie nodded with a smile that eased the weight on his heart. Jack returned home and stared at the phone. One number to dial, a few words to speak. Yet the decisions that change a life always come with the weight of an inner battle. He took a deep breath and dialed Margaret. She answered after exactly one ring, her voice steady, as though she were standing beside him, waiting for this moment. "Jack, I accept," he whispered, then stronger. "I want the job." "Good," Margaret replied, joy barely hidden beneath her composed tone. "But before you confirm officially, I want to hear your reason." Jack blinked in surprise. "Why does that matter?" "Because one day she said that reason will save you from breaking." Jack paused, then answered quietly, "I am doing it for Ellie. Because I want her to grow up seeing her father change his life." And he swallowed, "Because I think I can help people like me." Margaret was silent for a brief second. "That is enough." "But I have conditions," Jack said, his voice steadier now. "I want a 6-month trial period, and I do not want Ellie's tuition scholarship until I prove I deserve it." "Agreed," Margaret said immediately. Anything else? Jack looked toward the small kitchen where he and Ellie had eaten countless meals telling stories to distract themselves from exhaustion. "I want to keep one shift a week at Pinewood Diner. To remember where I came from." This time, Margaret did not respond right away. When she did, her voice held more warmth than he had ever heard from her. "I respect that." Jack felt half the weight lift from his shoulders, and he added, "I want full authority over the community projects. I do not want to be a figurehead. If I wanted a figurehead," Margaret said, "I would have chosen someone famous. I chose you because I want you to lead." Jack's chest tightened. He was not used to hearing words like that spoken about him. Then he whispered, "I will do my best." "No," Margaret corrected gently. "You will do well. I am never wrong about people like you." When the call ended, Jack stood in the middle of the small living room, his hand still resting on the phone. He could feel the change beginning, not like a violent storm, but like a rising tide, slow yet powerful, lifting his life from the worn-down ground he once thought he would be buried under forever. That evening, when Jack picked Ellie up from Ms. Davis's house, she came running toward him with a smile so bright it washed away the darkness of the past 3 days. "Daddy, I didn't cry today." Jack lifted her into his arms, holding what felt like the future shining in her eyes. I made a decision," he whispered into her hair. "We are going to change our lives, sweetheart." Ellie pulled back, her eyes shining. "You are going to work for Miss Margaret." "Yes," he said, "but only if you agree." Ellie nodded hard, then hugged him again. "I think Mommy would be really proud." A tiny sentence, yet powerful enough to shake Jack's entire world before settling it again, stronger than before. And before night fully settled, Jack knew one thing. He had chosen the harder path. But it was also the right one. The journey had just begun, and it would change not only Jack, but the lives of people he had not even met yet. On Jack's first morning, stepping into Harrington Industries as a new employee, the sky over Pittsburgh was wrapped in a thin layer of white fog, as if reminding him that every transformation in life arrived with a touch of uncertainty. He wore the shirt he had ironed as flat as he could, his tie knotted neatly, yet his palms still sweated as he stood in the grand lobby of the building he had only ever dared admire from the outside. The elevator to the 27th floor opened with a crisp chime. Jack stepped into the long hallway, lined with dark wood glass walls on both sides, reflecting the silhouette of a man trying hard to look more confident than he felt. Margaret was waiting at the door of her large office, not with the stern posture of a CEO, but with a calmness that made it feel as if she had prepared the entire world for him to walk into. "Welcome to your first day," she said, her voice quiet but strong enough to sweep away the worry clinging to his chest. "I wanted to show you around myself." Jack did not know how many CEOs personally guided new hires, but he guessed the number was small, and Margaret belonged at the very top of that rare list. She led him past rows of offices where people in tailored suits typed at speeds that felt like a race against perfection. A few lifted their heads to look at Jack, their expressions mixed with surprise and doubt. He knew they had read the articles, heard the rumors, wondered why a diner waiter was being brought to the 27th floor, where every decision affected hundreds of families. But Margaret did not let him feel small. "They will get used to you," she said, without turning back. "Just do your part." Jack nodded, feeling steadier. She stopped at an office with a large glass door. "This is yours." "A bit smaller than mine," she added, with a rare hint of humor. Jack stepped inside and froze. The room was not big, but the natural light pouring through the large window made it feel like a space waiting to be filled by him. On the desk sat a brand new computer, gleaming like it had been carved from silver, a stack of documents, and a small handwritten card. "Welcome to your new journey." M. Jack brushed his fingers over the letter M and felt his throat tighten. Since Laura's passing, no one had believed in his future quite like this. Margaret stood beside him. "Remember, Jack, you are not here to become me. You are here to become the person this program needs." She handed him a packet nearly 2 inches thick. "These are the priority cases. Here people are not numbers. You will understand each person before you make any decision." Jack accepted the packet with both hands, as if holding something fragile and alive. "Who will train me? I will," Margaret replied without hesitation. "At least for the first 3 months." He stared at her. "But you are the CEO. You have countless responsibilities." "I still make time for what matters," she said, then turned away. Her words followed Jack like a guiding line throughout the rest of the day. He began reading the files one by one. Rachel, a single mother of 2 working night shifts at a grocery store. Thomas, a 52-year-old mechanic laid off after an injury. The Gomez family, 2 parents working full-time, yet still unable to afford rent. Each file was a story. each story a fracture in society he had never seen from this angle. Sometimes Jack paused, staring out the window at the buildings across the city, wondering whether he truly had the strength to carry this responsibility. Near lunchtime, Margaret appeared in his doorway. "Eat with me," she said. It was not an invitation, it was instruction. In a small meeting room they sat across from each other, with simple plates of salad and sandwiches. It was not a political lunch. No ceremony, no assistants. Just two people learning how to work together. "Are you afraid?" Margaret asked, as she stirred her coffee. Jack gave a faint laugh. "I have never done anything worth being afraid of, until now." "Good," she said. "Fear means you understand the importance of your work." Jack suddenly asked a question he had not planned. "Why did you not choose someone with experience?" Margaret looked directly at him. "Experienced people often think they already know the answers. You do not. You will listen before you decide. That is a skill no university teaches." In the afternoon, Jack joined his first project meeting. The room was large, with a big screen, charts and diagrams everywhere, and experts speaking in technical language he didn't fully understand. Then someone turned toward him. "Do you have any input, Jack?" The room fell silent. Jack opened his mouth, heart pounding, but he told the truth. "I do not understand all the technical terms yet. But I know this. If we build this program without talking directly to the people we want to help, we will fail before we even start." The silence stretched 3 seconds longer. Then one person nodded. Another wrote something down. Margaret sat at the far end of the table, hands clasped, a faint smile hiding in her eyes. When the meeting ended, she walked past him and said only one sentence. "You just earned your first point." At the end of the day, Jack walked out of Harrington Industries, exhausted in body, but lighter in spirit than he had been in years. For the first time, he felt like he might actually belong. When he picked up Ellie from school, she ran to him and asked immediately. "How was the first day?" Daddy Jack smiled, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "Hard," he said. "But I did it." Ellie beamed wider than the sunset, glowing behind the tall buildings. "I knew it." And in that moment, Jack understood that he was not just building a community support program. He was building a new future for his family. And this first day was only the beginning of something larger, deeper, and more beautiful than he had ever dared imagine. 6 weeks after Jack began the job, the office on the 27th floor no longer felt unfamiliar. But the challenges had only grown heavier, especially as the Second Chances program approached its first real implementation phase. Jack spent every day meeting families, speaking with them, filling pages and pages with handwritten notes, and it was those conversations that helped him shape a new support model that made many people in the company look at him differently. But the further he pushed, the stronger the undercurrents became. Some members of the board began whispering that the program was too expensive, too risky, too dependent on the judgment of someone with insufficient experience. Jack heard the doubts through hallway murmurs, through sympathetic glances from co-workers, and he knew the real battle was coming. The breaking point arrived one morning when Margaret was rushed to the hospital due to exhaustion after weeks of working nearly without sleep. The news spread through the building in minutes, and before Jack could even go visit her, he received a notice. The board had called an emergency meeting to consider temporarily suspending the Second Chances program. No one invited him, but he stood up, closed the packet in front of him, and walked straight to the conference room on the 30th floor, where a single vote could erase 6 weeks of work in an instant. When he pushed the door open, 12 board members turned toward him with visible surprise. "You were not invited," an older man with silver hair said, his voice cold. Jack felt the weight of the room pressing in, but he did not step back. "I know," Jack replied, "but this program is my responsibility. And if you are planning to end it, I want to say what I know first." A woman wearing expensive glasses folded her arms, tilting her head with skepticism. "And you think you understand this program better than we do?" Jack drew a deep breath, remembering Rachel, remembering Tom, remembering the people who placed their hope in him. "I do not think," Jack said quietly. "I know." He stepped forward, standing under the cold white lights. "To you, second chances is a budget drain. But to the people I have met, it is the only thing giving them a chance to stand up one more time. You want data. Rachel, a mother of 2, is learning a new trade after 10 years, trapped in a job that could not sustain her family. Tom, a 58-year-old cook, is about to receive a vocational certification after being left behind by his industry for 3 decades. The Gomez family finally has the opportunity to move into better housing next month. These people are not numbers. They are real results." A man across the table frowned. "But the biggest risk Jack cut in, is doing nothing. Miss Harrington built this program on a single principle: dignity matters. And if we cut it now, we are saying the poor are not worth investing in." The room thickened with silence. Jack let his gaze move across each person at the table, his voice quieter but stronger. "If you vote to suspend this program, I will resign today. But you will have to look Margaret in the eye when she returns and tell her that faith in human kindness was not worth sustaining." The final words fell like a stone. No one answered. Jack turned and walked out, his heartbeat so loud it echoed in every step down the hallway. He had no idea what their decision would be, but he knew he had spoken the truth. 2 hours later, Jack's phone vibrated. A message from Margaret. They voted. The program stays. No objections. "You did well, Jack." Jack stood still, eyes closed for a long, quiet moment. For the first time in his life, he had not just survived a decision. He had shaped one. 6 months passed as lightly as a breeze, yet they left deeper marks on Jack's life than any years before them. He was no longer the waiter who bowed his head at the sight of an overdue electric bill or a sudden tuition increase. He was now the man who walked into the 27th floor every morning with a list of families waiting for him to open a new door in their lives. And what changed Jack was not the sleek employee badge or the salary that finally allowed him to breathe. It was the small moments he witnessed, moments that stitched themselves into him like new veins carrying purpose. It was Rachel's smile the day she received the first job she ever believed she deserved. It was the grateful gleam in Tom's eyes when he put on his new restaurant uniform and called Jack just to say, "I did it." It was the joyful laughter of the Gomez boy echoing through a bright new apartment that replaced their old damp room. Those moments became Jack's lifeblood, pushing him through each day with a persistence he never knew he had. Ellie changed, too. She grew up in the light of a new father, still gentle and humble as always, but steadier now like a tree that had finally found soil strong enough to root itself. She proudly told her friends that her dad helped people who needed a chance, and every time Jack heard her say it, his heart rang, like a bell struck perfectly. But not everything was smooth. Some nights he came home with legs heavy from stories, too painful, files, too complex families, that seemed to have been abandoned by society for far too long. There were moments Jack feared he was not skilled enough, not fast enough, not strong enough to carry all the hope placed in him. In those moments, he remembered Margaret's words. "Stand with people before you, stand with numbers." And that always brought him back to the path. One late afternoon at the end of the month, sunlight coated the office like a thin layer of honey when Jack received an email from Ellie's school. She had officially earned a scholarship for the next 4 years after acing her placement test. He read it again and again, just to be sure he was not dreaming. Ellie ran into the living room when he came home, her eyes glowing. "Daddy, I really got the scholarship." Jack lifted her and spun her around his heart, warm like winter sunlight. But that evening, when Ellie excitedly asked if she would move to the prestigious new school, Jack sat beside her and held her hand. "Ellie," he said softly, as if touching a butterfly wing. "Do you want to stay at your current school, with the friends who wait for you every morning, where you feel like you belong?" Ellie paused, then nodded. "I like it there. I don't want to leave my friends." Jack smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then we will stay. The scholarship should go to someone who truly needs it. You and I, we are okay now." That night, standing by the window watching streetlights blur on the wet pavement, Jack realized something he had never dared face. For the first time in many years, he was not living to outrun poverty, pain, or loss. He was living toward something new, something good, something right. And as if destiny knew, Jack needed a quiet moment to recognize that Pinewood Diner called to ask if he could take the weekend night shift, the shift he had promised himself he would always keep. He walked into the familiar diner, feeling strangely light, as if it was no longer the place that drained him, but the place that reminded him of how far he had come. Regular customers greeted him with warm nods. Tom texted to say he had become the head cook at his new restaurant. Megan sent him a photo of her cosmetology school graduation certificate. Jack smiled, pride glowing in his chest. Near midnight, the diner door chimed softly. A familiar silhouette stepped in, wearing a long black coat, calm and composed. Margaret. She chose her old table, the one that had changed the entire orbit of Jack's life. She ordered coffee and apple pie, just like that first night. When Jack brought them over, she looked up her eyes, steady and warm. "You are on the right path, Jack." Jack did not answer, only placed the check on the table. Beneath 2 folded bills was a small piece of paper. "Keep going. The world needs people like you." Jack held the note gently, feeling a wave of warmth flood his chest. Outside the diner, snow had begun to fall. He looked through the window and saw the world shifting seasons just like he had. From the perspective of a specialist in human behavior and the nature of recovery, Jack Morgan's journey reveals a truth modern society often forgets. People are not defined by where they begin, but by how they choose to rise each time life tests them. Individuals like Jack, those who have tasted loss, collided with their own limits, and seen the bottom of despair, are often the ones who understand most deeply the value of kindness and dignity. And sometimes that very kindness is powerful enough to open doors no one expected. The story of Jack and Margaret also reminds us that true leadership does not lie in authority or position, but in the ability to recognize the light in someone else, even when they cannot see it in themselves. A timely glance, a well-placed belief can change an entire life, and that life in turn can change countless others. If this journey touched you, if it reminded you that goodness still has a place in this world, press. like to help spread the message and subscribe so you will not miss the next human stories. And before you go, comment the phrase, "Believe in good," as a reminder that sometimes even the smallest spark of hope is enough to illuminate an entire path ahead.